The courtroom was quiet, but the silence was more deafening than a clap of thunder. Everyone's gaze within that wood-paneled room was upon the man who had just entered the heavy double doors. His name was Kody Brown, a name familiar to millions of people already through television screens nationwide. He had been the center of Sister Wives, a reality program that had opened up his unconventional family life to the world. For over a decade, he had allowed fans to witness him laugh, fight, celebrate weddings, bring new babies into the world, and cry about losing love. But this was not a show. This was actually real reality. And now, under the harsh, unforgiving lights of the courtroom, the man who had smiled so confidently in front of cameras appeared to be trudging into war. Seated behind him were the individuals who had been a part of his life, his ambitions, and his struggles. His wives, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin, sat in the gallery, their faces weighed down by years of feeling. Some of their faces were full of anger, others full of sorrow, and one or two still full of loyalty. Some of his children sat at random in the crowd, their eyes wide open, as if attempting to make sense of why their father was being tried, not by television critics now, but by a jury of peers. For years the Browns had existed openly as a plural family. They had chosen to share their lifestyle with the world, to demonstrate to the world that love came in many shapes and sizes, and family could be constructed differently. Millions watched their story, captivated by the concept of one man attempting to balance love, equity, and fatherhood throughout numerous marriages. The Browns contended that what they possessed was love, even if it was not packaged the way society had. But critics did not. To them, Kody Brown was not a man living his love story. He was a man pushing the envelope, testing the law's resolve to pursue him. And now, perhaps, the law had finally responded. As Kody made his way to his seat in front of the courtroom, he bore more than his own reputation on his shoulders. He bore the burden of a family torn asunder, and the burden of an audience which had witnessed every ascent and decline. To some, he remained a symbol of freedom, the freedom to live and love as one wanted. To others, he was a warning, evidence that having too many hearts in one place could only result in heartbreak. The soft drag of his shoes along the floor sounded like a drumbeat, the rhythm counting down to something explosive. Whispers coursed through the gallery, like tiny wisps of smoke. Reporters perched poised with notepads, waiting for every detail that could be tomorrow's front-page story. Was Kody Brown a man protecting his family, or was he being finally revealed for the whirlwind of chaos that followed him wherever he went? For an instant he glanced back over his shoulder into the gallery. His gaze swept past the familiar faces. Mary, the original woman who had once comprised his world, sat now with her lips compressed into a thin, resolute line. Janelle, firm and unflappable, revealed nothing, her serene calm both reassuring and intimidating. Christine, the wife once who had made the family home ring out with laughter, sat rigid, her eyes blazing with the type of pain born only of shattered promises. And then there was the youngest wife, Robin, leaning forward slightly, her eyes fixed on him with a combination of loyalty and concern. The quiet deepened as the judge came in, robes billowing over the smooth wood. People stood, and for one instant, all of the Brown family's history hovered suspended in the room. The TV show had revealed pieces of their lives, each carefully crafted, edited for fun. But here, there was no editing. All of their secrets, all of their pain, all of their decisions were set to be revealed. Kody lowered himself into the chair, jaw clenched, hands wrapped around the edge of the table. For years, he had stood behind his family on television, averring that what they shared was not peculiar or objectionable, but genuine and worthwhile. He had asserted repeatedly that plural marriage was not about dominance, but about affection. But as he looked around the women who had been by his side, he could sense that the world no longer perceived the unity that he had long taught. The cracks in the family were now too deep to cover up. A chill went through the courtroom, but no one shifted. It wasn't about legality anymore. It was about betrayal, loyalty, heartbreak, and decisions that had undulated through dozens of lives. The Browns had once been viewed as a unified, formidable unit, weathering the criticism of outsiders together. But now, Even within their circle, judgment had started. The attorneys rustled papers, the judge cleared his throat, and the first words of the trial ready to pierce the silence. But in that moment's hesitation, the atmosphere was heavy with the unasked questions. Would this be the day the world at last viewed Kody Brown not as a reality television star, not as a husband, not even as a father, but as a man whose decisions had brought him into a courtroom where love was no excuse? The cameras weren't rolling anymore, but the soap opera here was more intense than anything that had been on TLC. This wasn't a pre-scripted plot, not a season finale for ratings. This was real life, unedited and rugged, and it was about to rip open the narrative of the Brown family in ways no one could have ever imagined. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and even though all eyes had been on Kody when he initially stepped into the gallery, it didn't take long for focus to shift to the women who had accompanied him into the gallery. The wives, Janelle, Mary, Christine, and Robin, sat together in one row, but the imaginary lines dividing them were there for all to see. They had once stood before the world united, one family united by their religion, by their own choice, and by their common love for the man occupying the seat at the defendant's table today. But that oneness had broken, and all of it was apparent to anyone in the courtroom. They weren't just witnesses to the proceedings. They were evidence. Their very presence narrated a story of a once famous family who dared to live differently, now destroyed by conflict, mistrust, and bitterness. The court officials might have been concerned with legal papers, but the audience knew the truth. This was not just a legal hearing. It was a show, a human drama more real than anything staged on television. Mary sat nearest to the aisle, her fingers tightly clasped together in her lap. Her expression showed nothing at first, but the whitening of her knuckles around her fingers spoke volumes of a truth deeper than that of surface appearance. She was Kody's first wife. The woman who once had thought she was his rock, his partner, the one he would forever rely on. She recalled the beginning, when their relationship had been powerful enough to endure criticism, when she had believed adding other wives to their union would merely build on the love they all shared. But as time went by, she was a shadow, a supporting character in a family where she had assumed she would forever be the leading lady. And here she sat, now in that courtroom, her marriage having started in a chapel, and here it appeared to be ending in a courtroom. To her left was Janelle. She had always been the cool, level-headed one, the wife who aimed for stability, for keeping everything in line when things got emotional. She didn't put everything on her sleeve, but she didn't have to. Her silence was more deafening than words. Those familiar with her knew that Janelle's quiet wasn't passivity, it was strength. But that strength had been tried, and now she wore a type of weary dignity. She had once envisioned a plural family united, but now she could see what years of jealousy, neglect, and rival affections had constructed. A broken home where loyalty was in question and trust was lost. Next to Janelle was Christine. Of all the women, her presence was maybe the most tense. She had publicly left Kody, leaving behind a marriage that no longer nourished her heart. For years she had been the family's clown, the one who created the home atmosphere. But that sparkle had gone dimmed through the expectation that was always there. Her smile, which used to be hasty, now held flame. She sat upright, chin held high, refusing to curve around the man who had once promised her the world. For Christine, this courtroom had nothing to do with legality. It had to do with finally being heard, finally having her truth acknowledged. And then there was Robin. She was the newest addition to the family, and to most, she was the tipping point. The match that lit the flame of discord. The younger, quieter one, intensely devoted to Kody, she sat slightly forward in her chair, never losing sight of him. While the other wives bore resentment and bitterness, Robin bore loyalty, even perhaps love. To outsiders she was frequently portrayed as the favorite, the wedge that had driven the others from the family. And here, in this courtroom, her fidelity only served to solidify what many had already suspected. She was the sole pillar left standing next to Kody, when all of the others had fallen. The onlookers murmured, drinking in each nuance of the faces of the wives, their posture, their space from each other. The courtroom itself had become a theater, and these women were the players in a drama too potent to turn away from. Each sigh, each look, each frantic gesture was kindling for gossip. Who remained faithful? Who at last broke free? Who, if anybody, still believed in the man at the center of it all? The children sat scattered amidst the crowd, some of them looking nervous, others attempting to merge into the wooden benches. They had grown up under the eye of cameras, their childhood televised to millions. But this time it was different. This was not a plot to be cut into an episode. This was their family torn apart under the chilly power of the law. Some wouldn't even look at their father. Others glared at him with confusion and dismay, attempting to fit together the man they adored as dad, with the man who was now being judged as a defendant. What was so sad about it was how normal the scene appeared. A father, a mother, children, all in a courtroom, like families do sometimes when things break down. But underneath that veneer of normalcy lay a much more complex narrative. One of broken dreams shared, of trust tried, of love stretched so taut it had finally frayed. For years, audiences had argued over the Brown family. Were they plucky pioneers, demonstrating to the world that plural marriage might be stable and loving? Or were they living testimonials, that no man could successfully split himself equally among multiple women and multiple homes? The courthouse now looked like the ultimate answer to that question, and the wives seated in silence were the most conclusive proof anyone could possibly want. The judge observed them with subdued interest. He too could observe the cracks, the silences that were louder than words given in evidence. This was not merely a matter of law, it was a matter of people, of human hearts put under pressure until they cracked. Kody might have been the defendant, but everyone could notice that the wives were bearing their own heavy loads, their own silent evidence, long before they were ever asked to open their mouths. As the trial got underway, and attorneys rustled papers, the wives sat in their pew, each a new page of the same book. They were a reminder that this trial was not simply about whether polygamy had a place within the confines of the law. It was about what was lost along the way: trust, loyalty, companionship, and love. And as the first witness went on to step onto the stand, the crowd simply could not help but look at them. 4 women who had once been held together by faith and by choice were now separated by hurt. They were no longer the one big happy family people had watched on their television sets. They were survivors. They were competitors, and even possibly victims of a man who had promised them forever and had given them a family based on cracks. The courtroom wasn't quiet anymore. It hummed with the promise of drama being lived. And the spotlight had moved from Kody to the women who had once been his wives. Their faces spoke volumes before a word was said. This wasn't a family standing united anymore. This was a family on trial in tandem with the man they had once loved. The air thickened when the clerk called the court to order. Papers were shuffled, pens were clicked, and the buzz of softly spoken conversations dissolved to silence. When the judge raised his eyes, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze on Kody Brown, who stiffly sat in his chair, his tapping fingers on the shiny top of the defendant's table. For years, Kody had justified his lifestyle on interviews, in family gatherings, and on living rooms everywhere in America, but not here. Here his words would not be cut into clips or watered down by the comfort of his own living room. Here every word was important, and every lie or every truth would be weighed on the balance of justice. "Brown," said the judge, his tone even but incisive, "you are here not for amusement, not for a television audience, but because of the decisions you have made in your personal life. This court will consider those decisions. This court will balance them." Every pair of eyes turned to the prosecution table. The lead attorney rose, a tall man with sharp features and a commanding presence. He wasted no time setting the tone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "this is not a case about religion, nor is it a case about personal belief. This is about accountability. This is the aftermath of one man's decisions. Decisions that have forever scarred the people closest to him." He strode slowly, eyeing the wives who sat in the gallery, allowing the space between his sentences to hang suspended like a knife held aloft. "The defendant, Mr. Kody Brown, has always represented himself as a family man and a man of faith. But we will reveal that beyond the cameras, beyond the well-crafted facade, is a man who exerted control, who manipulated relationships, and who constructed a family on shattered promises." Gasps and murmurs ran around the courtroom. Kody's jaw clenched, but he didn't budge. He was aware the cameras weren't in attendance to cushion the blows this time. The lawyer went on. We are not here to try plural marriage. We are here to try his version of it. His version in which women gave up their aspirations for a man who could not share himself equally. His version in which children witnessed loyalty degenerate into competition. And his version in which love was a contest in which one person only could be the victor. Each cut word more deeply, making Kody out not a misunderstood spouse, but a self-absorbed patriarch. The audience shifted uncomfortably, curiosity riding with discomfort. The defense attorney stood to respond, his tone calm and reassuring. What the prosecution refers to as manipulation, we refer to as choice. What they refer to as promises broken, we refer to as the nuance of human relationships. Mr. Brown has not been secretive about his life. He has lived it out in the open, at great personal expense, so that the world might understand what it is to love differently. He is not guilty of coercion. He is guilty only of being human in a world that wants perfection. The arguments conflicted like thunder, one depicting Kody as a villain, the other as a man shackled by circumstance. Kody sat silently, his face inscrutable, but within a tempest raged. He recalled all the times he had justified his family to strangers, telling them that plural marriage was not about domination but about love. He had stood in front of cameras, smiling, proud, telling them that his wives had chosen this way of life willingly, that they were bound together by faith and purpose. Yet as he glanced at them now, Mary's hardened face, Janelle's stoic silence, Christine's defiant glare, Robin's quiet loyalty, he wondered how convincing that defense would sound in this room. The prosecution's next move was ruthless. They brought out journals, emails, even clips from the show. We will show, the attorney said, holding up a transcript, that Mr. Brown spoke words of equality, but practiced favoritism, that he had vowed to each wife her own portion of love and attention, but hoarded the lion's share for one alone. He glanced up into the gallery, his hand rising slightly in Robin's direction. This disequilibrium was not concealed, it was lived, and it did this unrepairable harm. Robin blushed, avoiding his eyes. The others sat rigidly, their faces revealing decades of hurt. The defense protested, but the judge let the evidence stand. This was no longer about television editing. This was about the truth beneath the reality show. Kody's heart was racing. He wanted to have his say, to yell that love was complicated, that no man could juggle multiple relationships equally well, that he had tried his best. But here, in this clinical room with its serious protocol, his own truth was an excuse. The prosecutor continued. What happens when promises are broken? What happens when love is rationed like water in the desert? Families fall apart, trust is lost, and children, the innocent ones, are left wondering about the very definitions of love and commitment. The words rang out in the room, and some of Kody's older children put their heads down. The reality of their lives, which had once been something they had shrugged as normal, was now being broken down as proof of harm. The defense responded passionately. Every marriage has its rough spots. Every family does as well. But as opposed to most of us, the Browns lived their rough spots in front of the cameras. They bared themselves not to win fame, but to tell the truth. They wished for the world to realize that families come in many different shapes and colors, and that love can be pushed beyond convention. To take those struggles and turn them into charges is not justice, it's brutality. The judge heard attentively, his face impossible to read, but the air was charged with tension that felt almost suffocable. The lawyers were not merely debating law, they were debating what a family, what choice, what love was for the audience. It felt like witnessing history in the making. For the Browns, it felt like being exposed naked in front of the world, all wounds open. When the lawyers concluded their opening addresses, the courtroom was electric with tension. The prosecution had portrayed Kody as a man who employed religion as a cloak of self-indulgence. The defense had portrayed him as an imperfect but sincere man, attempting to live according to values greater than himself. And all through it, Kody remained silent, his lips set into a hard line, his fists interlocked in front of him on the table. He could sense the gaze of his wives, his children, the onlookers, and even strangers nationwide, who would get to hear of this trial. They weren't waiting for a verdict. They were waiting to learn the truth about who Kody Brown actually was. This was no longer a reality TV debate. This was the case against Kody Brown, and it had only just started. The instant the first wife was called to testify, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. The hush grew more pointed, more brittle, as if the room itself realized the gravity of what was about to be uttered. All of them leaned forward, breath suspended, to listen for the voices of the women who lived closest to Kody Brown, who had known him not as a TV personality, or as a legal figure, but as a husband, a partner, a man. Mary went first. She walked slowly to the witness chair, heels clicking off the floor like a metronome ticking down to truth. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a tight line, but her eyes carried years of hurt. She sat, took the oath, and folded her hands in her lap. When the prosecutor asked her to describe her marriage, she hesitated. 1,000 memories seemed to overwhelm her all at once. The early years of laughter, faith, and sense of mission, and the later years of cold distance, silence, and aching loneliness. At first, she started out quietly. It was everything I thought it would be. We were partners. We were building something together. I believed I was special to him. Her voice faltered, but she rallied. But over the years I began to feel like I was invisible. I would sit at home waiting, wondering whether he would want to spend time with me or not. I could see him giving attention to other people, and it just seemed like it had become nothing for me. The prosecutor then asked her if she was loved. Mary's lips quivered. She looked down and replied in a faint voice, "Not anymore." The words hovered in the air like smoke, and Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat, jaw clenching. Set, he'd heard Mary say that kind of thing before, but to hear it here, before a judge, before strangers, felt like a knife slicing deeper than ever. When the defense attorney asked on cross-examination, he said, "But you chose this life, didn't you? You knew what plural marriage meant." Mary tucked her chin up a notch, her tone stronger now. "I did it because I believed in him. I thought love would increase, not vanish. I didn't want to feel abandoned. I didn't want to be left behind." Her testimony was brief, but the weight was great. She exited the stand stiff-shouldered, and as she returned to her seat, she did not glance once at Kody. Janelle followed next, calm, steady, and logical. She carried herself with a different kind of strength. Where Mary's voice cracked with emotion, Janelle's was measured, almost clinical. She described the family as a complicated structure, one that required constant balance and fairness. "We tried to make it work," she said plainly. "We had rules, schedules, systems. But the truth is, systems don't fix feelings." At some point, it became less about us as a family, and more about Kody's decisions. He decided where to spend his time, his focus, and we all bore the brunt of it. The prosecutor wondered if she believed their family was equal. Janelle shook her head. "No, equality was the ideal, but it wasn't the truth. Some of us bore more weight, more isolation, more sacrifices. That balance tipped us over." The defense pushed her, wondering if she still had respect for Kody. Janelle hesitated, then replied cautiously, "I respect the man he wanted to be, but I don't respect the choices that brought us here." Her voice was like a silent thunder, not dramatic, but intensely powerful. She sat down as calmly, and with the same dignity as she had stood to take the stand. But the quiet in the room told everyone just how much her testimony had struck. Then Christine was summoned. The atmosphere changed at once. She did not walk to the stand as had the others, hesitantly or quietly forcefully. She walked with fire. Her head held high, her eyes bright, her step deliberate. She took the oath succinctly and looked straight at Kody, as if challenging him to avert his eyes. The prosecutor questioned her as to why she had ended the marriage. Christine's reply was swift. "Because love shouldn't be competitive," she asserted, her voice echoing in the room. "For all those years, I kept telling myself I could manage. That it was okay to share a husband for the sake of our faith, for the sake of family. But the reality is, I was unhappy. I wanted love, actual love. Not leftovers. Not crumbs." Her words cut through the room, leaving even the reporters stuck in their seats. "I was raising kids, keeping the family together, but I was dying on the inside. And when I finally figured out that I was worth more than being an option, I walked away. Kody shifted a second time, visibly hurt. But Christine didn't move. She went on. Her voice level, her ire sharpened into focus. This is not about plural marriage. This is about our marriage. And ours was damaged because he chose to stop choosing me. The defense attempted to temper her testimony, intoning that perhaps the struggles were two-way, that perhaps Christine had erred as well. She leaned forward and snapped. Yes, I made mistakes. My mistake was staying as long as I did. The gallery hummed, the force of her words resonating through the room. Christine went back to her seat, her expression unmoved, her presence hovering like a storm long after she had spoken. Last to be called was Robin. The youngest wife, who most thought had come between the others, made her way to the stand with shaking hands. She glanced in Kody's direction, then to the ground. She swore and sat, speaking softly when she started. I know what people think about me, she said softly. They think I destroyed the family. They think I stole him from them. But that's not how it was. I loved him. I still do. And I think he tried. I think he wanted all of us to be happy. The prosecutor pushed her, asking if she believed the family was equal. Her voice trembled. No, not always. I saw the pain. I saw the struggle. But I don't think it was because he wanted to hurt somebody. I think love is just complicated. When asked if she thought Kody was a good husband, she stared directly at him for the first time. To me, yes, she said. To the others, maybe not. But to me he has been. Her words caused her to tear up. And for the first time, Kody's demeanor relaxed, his eyes shimmering as he listened to her stand up for him. It was such a contrast to the chill of the others, and the gap was evident for everyone to witness. By the time Robin stepped down, the courtroom was electric with emotion. 4 women, 4 different truths, 4 different wounds exposed. Their testimonies were not merely evidence. They were testaments of love won and love lost, promises made and promises broken. And as the judge declared a recess, the audience sat in shock. This was no longer a trial. This was a family disintegrating, unwinding one agonizing reality at a time. The courtroom was full of quiet when all of them came back after recess. The atmosphere was denser now, as if the walls were heavy with the whispers of the wives' testimonies. No one whispered over a whisper. No one moved. The moment was too delicate, too charged. The judge presided from up above them all, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped as he watched the man at the eye of it all. Kody Brown. Kody's shoulders were knotted, his knuckles against the smooth wood of the defendant's table. He was smaller in a way, even with his huge frame, as if each sentence the women he used to call his wives spoke now weighed him down like an avalanche. Behind him the gallery remained rigid, the wives each with their own tempest of feeling, on the surface still aloof, Janelle impassive, Christine angry and unyielding, Robin crying but faithful. The children moved quietly, not knowing whether to glance at their father or the judge. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. The sound, plain and quiet, broke the room into silence. This case, he started, his tone deliberate and measured, is not like most that appear before this court. It is not a theft or violence case. It is not fraud or betrayal in the conventional sense of the word. But let there be no doubt, it is a case of great significance. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Kody. Mr. Brown, you lived your life in defiance of convention. You took a road that people don't agree with. A road that uncomfortably resides at the edge of our laws. And you didn't conceal it. You brought it forth. You let millions view as you grew up your family, as you grew through the challenges of your religion, your decisions, your marriages. By doing so, you opened yourself not just to respect but to criticism. The judge hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the wives. And what we have heard here, what this court cannot help but acknowledge, is the testimony of those who are nearest to you. Testimony of isolation, testimony of privilege, testimony of love that died when it could have flourished. Kody's lips compressing into a line, his eyes flicking to Christine, whose eyes met his without wincing. This is not, in the strictest sense, a trial of polygamy, the judge went on. This is a trial of its practice in one home. Your home. And the evidence presented here does not paint a picture of a family held equally by love and respect. It paints a picture of a family torn apart, broken, left to fare under the burden of promises unfulfilled. The words landed like sledgehammer blows. Even the defense lawyer had to lower his eyes, as if understanding the case for fairness and choice had been overwhelmed by naked emotion and truth. The voice of the judge grew deeper, calm and measured. This court will acknowledge the law. Yes, but it will also acknowledge the truth of that which has been lived. And the truth is this: the law may not punish you for loving more than one person, but the law will not protect you from the impact of what those decisions have wrought. The gallery collapsed, whispers shattering the silence like shards of glass. Was this it? Was the judge going to sentence or acquit? Kody's chest expanded and contracted with slow, heavy breaths. He tensed up, his hands wrapped around the table as if he was grasping the last vestige of control. "I find," the judge declared, his tone crisp now, "that while your existence is outside the pale of what most people feel is acceptable, it is not inside the pale of criminality. This court is not here to punish matters of the heart." He sat for a moment, allowing the force of the words to linger. "And so, legally, you are not guilty." Gasps filled the room. Relief danced over Robin's face. Kody let out a slow breath, his shoulders dropping. For an instant it looked as though he had been saved. But then the judge's tone became denser, infused with a different sort of weight, one not inscribed on law books but carved into human conscience. "But this court cannot deny the damage. I have heard 4 women speak their truths. I have heard of loneliness that spanned years, of disparity that fostered resentment, of children entangled in the web of war they never volunteered. What I observe is not a crime in the technical sense, but it is a tragedy in the human sense." Kody's features tightened. He gazed at the judge, consternation and ire flashing in his eyes. "You have not been punished by this court," the judge spoke slowly, "because life has punished you already. Your family you attempted to build has collapsed. The love you spread so thin has given you wounds that can never be removed. And those wounds on your wives, on your children, on yourself, are the real verdict." The room was stilled, each word reverberated off the walls. Kody blinked, his throat constricting, his lips opening as if he wished to protest, to defend. But the words would not come. The judge rocked back, his last pronouncement ringing like the ring of a gavel before it even descended. "Mr. Brown, the law cannot shatter you, but your decisions already have." And down came the gavel. One loud crack on the wood, and it was done. The silence that followed was excruciating. Kody remained still, his eyes fixed on the table as if it would provide him with an answer he couldn't find elsewhere. Around him the family started to move. Christine was the first to rise, her jaw clenched, eyes fixed ahead as she moved swiftly towards the door without looking back. Janelle trailed behind her, her movements quieter, slower but her head held high. Mary paused momentarily, her glance flicking toward Kody once before she turned her face from him, its expression unexpressive. Robin alone sat, her hand shaking slightly as she extended it toward him. "Kody," she breathed, her voice breaking, though he didn't glance at her. The kids flowed out in silence, their faces white, their faces frozen between sadness and bewilderment. Some would not meet their father's eyes, while the rest looked back at him with eyes that dared to ask a question he could not provide an answer to. "Why?" the onlookers murmured angrily. Now, journalists writing down their versions of what had just transpired. Some labeled it justice, some labeled it mercy, but all agreed on one thing: it marked the conclusion of something. The conclusion of a family previously regarded as unbreakable, now fractured in the eyes of the world. Kody remained immobile long after the courtroom started to clear, his thoughts whirling but his body locked. He had evaded punishment by the law, but the punishment of life was not to be escaped. And as he finally stood, his eyes brimming, his face pinched, he knew the judge had not been unjust. He did not lose to the court, he lost to himself. The gavel had fallen already, but its reverberation resonated with Kody Brown long after the courtroom had grown empty. He sat still at the defendant's table, the wood beneath his palms cold and unforgiving. For the first time in years, there were no cameras, no producers, no self-edited narratives, only silence. A silence that was denser than any argument his family had ever given. The judge's words haunted him. "The law cannot break you, but your choices already have. When Kody finally stood, his legs were like stone. The gallery that had been filled with his wives, his children, and inquisitive bystanders was almost empty. Reporters remained at the doors, whispering furiously, eager to spin his tale into headlines before the day's end. But the people who had meant the most, the ones he had once battled to defend, had vanished. He exited the courtroom alone. Outside, the sun shone brightly, but to Kody it seemed harsh, even cruel. Cameras flashed, reporters surged, microphones held out before him like swords. Kody, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think you've failed your family? Will sister wives go on now that the truth is out? He didn't respond. His lips were clamped shut, his eyes following the horizon line. The man who had been so cocky under the lenses of cameras now resembled a shadow of his former self. Robin was alone waiting at the courthouse stairs, her eyes puffy from weeping. She extended her hand towards him, her fingers shaking, but even she was unable to break the silence that had fallen between them. The Browns' house that night was not the home it once was. The long dinner nights, in which all sat together at the same table, argument mixed with laughter, were no more. The mornings of mad mayhem produced by dozens of children on the move, voices ringing down corridors, were no longer seen. There was vacancy now, rooms gone silent, places filled before with love made empty. Christine had long since resumed her own life. Her decision to go now sealed not only by feeling but by the verdict that had authenticated her sorrow. Janelle, reliable as ever, opted for distance as well, her loyalty no longer sturdy enough to keep her anchored. Mary moved deeper into muteness, her relationship with Kody little more than a recollection. And Kody, once the focal point of it all, stood in a home that no longer really felt like his. He roamed from one room to the next, late into the evening, his own footsteps echoing off the floors. In the kitchen, he could almost hear the specters of conversations that used to fill the room. In the living room, he could still envision his children sprawled on the couches, playing games, disagreeing, laughing, but those visions were just ghosts. The truth was vacant spaces. The children themselves sensed the change. Some phoned their mothers, asking questions to which they did not know the answers. Others kept the topic at bay, drowning in school, work, or friends. But all of them bore the same crushing truth. Their family would never remain what it had once been. But amidst this tempest, the world beyond it was noisier than ever. Headlines burst across news channels and social media. Judge rules Brown family a tragedy, rather than crime. Kody Brown evades the law, but meets his own demons. Sister Wives saga ends with courtroom thriller. Audiences who had once watched weekly as they followed the Browns were now analyzing every aspect online. Some sympathized, others mocked. Strangers waged heated battles, some upholding Kody's decisions, others excoriating them. The family's existence, previously given freely on television, had turned into a public display they could no longer manage. To Kody, outside noise only amplified the silence within. The ruling had saved him from punishment, but not from reality. His family was broken. His wives were no longer together. His children were divided. One late evening, Kody sat by himself at the dinner table with his hands folded together. The judge's words repeated in his head. Life has already punished you. At first he wanted to deny it, to be outraged at the suggestion that his decisions had brought all this suffering. He wanted to blame the media, the critics, even the wives themselves. But deep down, in the sort of honesty a man can only confront when he's alone, he knew the truth. He had loved them, yes, but he had failed them too. He had attempted to stretch himself too thin, attempted to give equally to all when he could not, and in doing so had left some hearts unfilled. He had pursued a vision of family so large, so unorthodox, that he hadn't realized the cracks developing until it was all over. And now, there was only the aftermath. Christine drew strength from autonomy, re-establishing her life beyond the auspices of plural marriage. Janelle, stable and independent, forged her own road, her integrity unblemished. Mary finally, after years of invisibility, gave herself the right to disengage. And Robin, hanging in there, confronted the harsh truth that even her devotion couldn't stick the fractured fragments back together. The kids came of age with the scars and the loveliness of their quirky family. Some stepped away from the spectacle, and some still struggled with the effect of decisions they hadn't made. As for Kody, he remained, his figure still tall, his voice still strong, but his presence now marked by the shadow of everything lost. The verdict hadn't branded him guilty, but life had branded him with something harsher: regret. And thus, the Brown's tale did not end with handcuffs and prison cells. It ended with something softer, but much more effective. It ended with a man walking out of a courtroom as free as the law would have it, but shackled by the results of his own choices. Because sometimes, the toughest sentence isn't inked on paper. It's etched in the quiet of an empty house, in the lack of love that once had been there, and in the eyes of children who have questions you can't provide answers for. The cameras weren't turning anymore. The show was over. But the real story, the tale of loss, of love, of decision and aftermath, would haunt them all for the remainder of their lives. And in that, maybe, lay the most authentic ending of all.